Hey guys, it's Robin, R Silent Crafts, and welcome to my studio. Thank you for all the lovely comments on the first miter square video. I'm so happy so many of you are joining in or have enjoyed the video. I thought it was just going to be me and maybe one or two other people, but it seems like a few of you are going to be making squares with us. Or probably more likely they're more shaped like diamonds, but we're going to consider them a square. Today I'm going to show you how to add your second square onto this section. Now what you want to do is you want to look at this first square, and this is where we started. This is where we cast off. So here's our point, and we know we cast off there because we have this one long one that comes to a point. This one, as you can see, it's kind of sidewindered off. That's where we cast on. This one we can follow our center spine up there and see that that's where we cast off. So we want to have our square or diamond, however you want to look at it, going like this. As we get going, you'll notice that our blanket is going to be more orientated this way, where you're going to be going off that way, and it's going to spread out. But it's good to start this way just to get an idea of where you're going. Then as you get moving, it really doesn't matter. So let's start over here. I decided to go with I'm calling it a coral color. They call it Arbor Rose. As you can see, I've already taken out my center yarn barf to get the beginning of my yarn there, my tail. We're not going to worry about weaving in our ends right now. As we get going and we get our blocks going and we start attaching more, then we'll start weaving them in. But for now, we're just going to go ahead and leave this here. Because there are two different ways. Some people weave them in one way, another person weaves them in the other way. So we'll go ahead and worry about that and have that discussion later. Let's get going on this square. Again, leave about 5 or 6 inches for your tail. It just makes it easier to put your needle on it and to get going through your little stitches and everything like that, as if you have a nice decent tail. Some people look at it as wasting yarn. I look at it as more of a security thing, to know that as I wash my blanket and it gets used and it comes in and out and stretches, especially if you're using wool, it's going to open up and stretch a little, specifically with superwash. I want to know that I wove my tail in enough that it's not going to come out. And also, who wants to struggle with a little piece like that? So we're going to start off and we're going to do pretty much the same that we did on this one. We're going to make our little slip knot there. If anything looks too fast today, just go ahead and refer back to the first video. Again, I move mine just because I like to have my tail end on this side and my long end that goes to the ball of yarn on this side. The numbers we're going to use today is whatever ones you used for your square. I use 16 and 16 for a total of 32 stitches. If you're making a smaller square, larger square, if you're using sock yarn, if you're using bulky yarn, your numbers may be different than mine. So I want to have 16 going this way, my center stitch, and then 16. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be doing 16 stitches here, and then I'm going to pick up 16 stitches along this little square here. I will put my center marker in, and I'll probably do that afterwards. I could do it before, but it's going to be real easy to tell where 16 and 16 is. So that's going to be up to you. So I have my first stitch on. I'm going to go ahead and cast on 16 stitches. I'm sticking with the knitted cast on because that is what I did on the first block. And it does not matter 100%. But if you are going to be looking at it and you may notice a discrepancy between one cast on and another, there is a multiple number of cast ons you can do. So whichever one is comfortable for you. If you want to try a few different ones out, I don't think as time goes on it's going to be that noticeable. And if you decide to add a border, then it won't matter at all. So if you want to use this as some practice to try different things. Now remember, we are going to build ours out in more of a modular thing where we're going to add all of our squares together. If you want to make these like granny squares and just make them individually, and then go ahead and sew them all together in whatever fashion you like, this is it. Just keep making this square over and over again until you have enough for your blanket. I'm thinking I'm going to do mine in a 9 patch, That'll allow me to choose my colors and keep them mixed up nicely. And also with summertime coming in Florida, I really don't want to get very far on this blanket like I did on the last one and not want that weight in my lap. It also allows me to take just one skein of yarn in a project bag and just add on one square. So if I'm sitting somewhere at the pharmacy or at the doctor's office, I don't have to have a giant blanket in my lap. Now, it is a great conversation starter. When I was taking my sock blanket out places, they loved it. When I took it up to the chemo center, when Rob was getting his chemo, everyone fell in love with it. So that was really fun to show it off there. But staying at home with it and knitting it with it on my lap could be a bit much, especially if I'm using worsted weight or bulky. Even the little sock weight yarn just got to be much after a while. So that's what I'm going to do. I decided I'll do a 9 patch just because I love 9 patches. You can do 4 patches, you could do 16 patches, whatever works for you. I probably should be casting on while I'm chatting. But we do have a lot of options with this blanket and a lot of variety that we can choose from. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. There's 16. So that's going to be this edge right here. So now I want to pick up 16 along here. And that's why we had that where we slipped the first stitch purlwise and the last stitch we knit through the back loop. That gives us that nice little ridge. It looks just like the top of knitting anywhere else where we can see our stitches beautifully. See them on this side just as well. So that's going to be good. As you see, I put a stitch marker on the front of mine just to remind me where the front is. I can tell by the raised ridge, but maybe if it's your first miter square and you're not used to it, or your ridge isn't as predominant as mine, a lot of times with thinner yarn it might not stick out as much. Put a stitch marker on the front, and that way you know that you're on the front of your project and not the back. As a reminder, it looks definitely different back there. Also, if you're like me and you're doing Whip It Wednesday, or you want to show progress to yourself and to see how far you're going and stuff, put a stitch marker in each of the squares you do on each session, and then maybe at the end of a week or at the end of a month, you can go ahead and count up all your squares, put it in your Ravelry, on your blog, just on your Instagram or something like that, to say, okay, in April I put on 15 squares, I plan on doing so much more, or just about the same in May or whatever. And then you can remove your stitch markers, and when you do your next months, you can put new stitch markers in, and it just makes you feel like you're making progress, because otherwise if you're just looking at the blanket, sometimes it's kind of hard to see it growing. So I have my stitch marker. So here are my 16 stitches, and they're going to be going that way. So now I'm going to start picking up here. So let me see how many of these little things I have. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Okay, so I have 16 and it takes me to here. So I have this little extra bit. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes I don't have enough. And that's because, as I mentioned before in the previous video, if I fall asleep, if I set it down and lose track and I don't keep up. So maybe I missed a decrease row and I knit this front row here just as a standard row and I didn't decrease. It'll make my little square here a little bit taller than other ones. Remember, we talked about how once you start putting them all together, it'll go ahead and it'll even it all out, especially if you're using a yarn that can be blocked, like some type of a wool or something like that, or linen and cotton. You can go ahead and block them all out and get it to work. The acrylic is going to be fine. I can go ahead and steam it and block it a little bit that way. So I'm just going to keep aware, and what I'm going to do is, as I'm going to pick up my stitches halfway, and then I'm going to see how many I picked up and how many I have left. And I know that I'm going to have, it looks like 2 extra here. So what I can do is I can skip one when I'm picking it up. And if I only have 15 and I need 16, I can pick up 2 stitches. And I'll show you how to do that. So let's start by picking up our stitches. Right side's facing. I've got my yarn and my needle in my right hand. Move my tail out of the way. Now, if you need to pick up an extra stitch and if you only have 15 of these, you can always come in this little spot here where our knot is when we started with our slip knot. But I'm going to go ahead and pick up this stitch that I see right here. This, when I go to weave it in, it's going to take that little knot area and everything and take care of it. And I don't need the extra stitch. So I'm going to put my yarn behind here. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to basically knit it. So I'm going to knit it like this and pull it through and make sure that I'm going through both of those stitches and bring it up. And I want to snug it up so it's nice and tight up with the rest of them. The yarn here is going to keep it from being too super tight, but just don't be yanking on it. Now sometimes people have a hard time picking up stitches, even I do sometimes, so you can take a crochet hook and you can go underneath those 2 stitches, put your yarn through it, and pull it through. So if you're a crocheter, this might be easier for you, and then just put it on your hook that way and then tighten it up. I don't want to have too much. You're going to end up with a little gap here, but I don't want to have too much of a gap. And I'm just going to make sure I pick up 16. See, I have 2 loops on my needle right there. You see the 2 of them? If you want, so you can keep track and know when you hit 16, we can put our stitch marker in on here. When you pick up your stitch, just like when we're casting on, you want to make sure that that stitch makes it past this little narrow part of your needle and you get over here to your actual needle. That's going to be what sizes your knit stitch and your loop and everything. If you do it down here, it's going to be super tight. So you want to make sure it gets up to the widest part of your needle. Seven. And 8. And then I'm going to look. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. A lot of times, since if I look at this with this larger yarn, if I skip this one, I'm worried that it's going to have this weird bobble there. So what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to go ahead and pick up all the stitches I can on this side, even if it gives me extra. With the sock yarn, I was able to go ahead and skip a stitch and it didn't really show. So if you notice that you have that weird, if you pick this up and you get this weird little bobble back there like that, go ahead and just pick up all the loops. And when we go back on the other side, when we're supposed to just knit all the way across, what we're going to do is we're going to decrease there. So I'm really glad that we had this, well, I had this little bit of a misstep here. I think I'm going to pick up in this spot here, just so I don't have any weird little sections. Now this part right here, we're going to use this spot right here, this last little loop of a stitch here, where our point is when we do this square right here in the center. So don't worry about picking that one up. So then I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. I feel like Sesame Street with the count. 12, 14, 16, 18, 19, ha ha ha. So I have 3 extra stitches, so I need to get rid of those 3 stitches on this side. Now if you have 16 and 16, you can go ahead and just knit straight across on the second row. If you're like me, I'm going to put this little point down here and you have extra stitches. I want to decrease them somewhere along here and then in here. If I only have 1 to decrease, I'll do it right here by the stitch marker. But I want to go ahead and spread those 3 out. So now this one, I'm not going to slip the first stitch because it's just the way it's cast on. I'm going to go ahead and knit this stitch because I don't want to end up with having anything weird going on like I do when I slip it later on. Make sure I get all of my pieces of my yarn. There we go. There's 1. So I'm going to go ahead and knit these 2 together. I think it's going to be easier to knit them together through the back loop, just because when you cast your stitches on this way, a lot of times it's going to twist your stitches. Now, because it's twisted, the very first row like this isn't going to be noticeable, but what it does is when your stitches get twisted, it also tightens it up. So a lot of times this first row, when you're knitting it back across, it can be a little bit loosey-goosey, but since we're knitting it in a twisted fashion, then it's going to tighten that up. Now, if yours aren't twisted because of the way you picked it up, some people they twist, some people they don't. Mine always seem to twist. You can go ahead and just knit normally. Now, the way I know mine's twisted is, see this loop back here, this leg of the stitch? It's in the front of the stitch. If it were normal, this front one would be in the front. Now, if you want to If you want to untwist it so that this isn't like this and you don't want a twisted stitch, if you knit through the back loop, it'll automatically switch it around, or you can take it off the needle and move it like this so that what you're looking at right here is that stitch. But when I'm looking at the first one, I see is the one on the back of the needle. So that's a twisted stitch. I'm going to keep track of what I've got. I'm just going to spread those decreases evenly. Put one about here. Again, I'm going to go through the back loop just because my stitches are twisted. You can do it through the front. You can do any type of a decrease that you would like. Leave it to me to make a mistake on the very first square, but I'm glad it happened because I was going to talk you through it, but at least this way you can see what I'm doing to fix it. 14, 15, and then I'm going to go ahead and decrease this one by the stitch marker. It's really going to blend in well. These are all going to blend in along the row. You're not going to notice them, and then this one will blend in because that's right where the stitch marker is, and that's where we decrease anyway, but on the other side. And then on these, I'm just going to go ahead and knit them as if I were knitting the first row of any type of knit project. These stitches are all laying properly. See, there's only one stitch in the front and I can see it. I can't see my back one unless I go and look for it. Normally we would just knit this row straight across. We wouldn't have to think about it, but by picking up all the stitches, it's going to make my square look even in that section. And also, now this one you can go ahead and knit through the back stitch since it's an actual stitch and not just a slipped on stitch. Now when we turn it around here, you don't notice any of the decreases. I only did it once. Well, I did only on that one row to decrease back down to 16. Unlike here where we're going to get a big ridge because we did the decreases on either side. Just this little row decreasing through there, it's not going to be noticeable. I do it when I'm knitting sweaters or shawls or hats. If I notice I have extra stitches, just somewhere where it looks like I can hide it, I'll go ahead and decrease a stitch so that it's not noticeable. I put the wrong stitch marker on. I like the dangly one, so when I get there, I'm just going to go ahead and switch it out. This stitch marker I want to use to mark the front of it. So for me, my tail is right there. Now I'm just going to go ahead and start working this square like I normally would. It's going to create, this side will be a straight edge here and a straight edge there, and then my diagonal will go that way. If you want your diagonals to go in weird different directions and you want to play with them, then instead of doing each square on the right this way and on the left that way, you can alternate them up and play with them. But I think the simplest way I'm going to show you guys is to make all of your center decreases go with your spines in the same direction. So now on this first row, I'm just going to go ahead and refresh your memory and we'll do the decrease. So I'm going to show you the first round, the decrease, and then I'll go ahead and put a little time lapse on and I'll knit this entire square, and then I'll show you what it looks like when I get towards the end. And then in the next video, I'll show you how to pick this up. I'm trying to record these all in the same day so that I can post them like one right after the other, maybe one a day coming up in the next week. That way you can have all your blocks ready and you don't have to wait for me. So it doesn't take, I want to give you guys enough time to get your gauge square and get your swatch, oh my goodness, the swatch still. To get your gauge swatch done to figure out your needles and your yarn and how many stitches. But when you get to this point, I don't want you all to have to wait on me to make more videos. So you'll probably see them all in 1 week. Find our long yarn that's connected to the ball and not, we don't want to knit with that tail. Now remember, our first stitch, we're going to bring the yarn to the front. And we're going to slip it as if to purl. Our first row, getting everything all, it takes a couple rows to get everything just to slide nicely for me. So I'm going to slip that and then bring my yarn right to the back because we're only going to knit. So I'm going to knit and I'm not going to think about what I'm doing, which is probably what got me in trouble on the last square. But going across one row, keep knitting until I get to 2 stitches before There's my 2 stitches. I'm going to knit them together through the front. I'm going to change this marker only for me because the marker right here is a lot thicker and I like this thin wire, plus I like to see a pretty bead hanging. Then I'm going to knit 2 through the back loop. Now remember, we're on the front, that's why we're doing these decreases. But as you saw, if you make a mistake, we can fix them. You can also, I've done it before, you can just tear your entire square out and start all over. A little bit difficult if you see a mistake in the middle of your blanket, but if you see it on a square that you just finished knitting or you're halfway through knitting, then you can go ahead and fix it and take it out, redo it through the back loop. So there we go. We have our straight edge with our cast on going here. And then we are picking up our stitches along here. And we're slipping these stitches here because when we put our next block up here, again, we're going to cast on and then pick up those stitches. So let me go ahead and work on this while you guys work on yours. After I get all 3 blocks done, then I'll show you how to weave in your ends. I believe I already have a video on weaving in ends, and if I do, I will put a link down below in the description box for those of you that don't want to wait, but I want to show you the 2 different ways that you can weave in the ends on this project. Okay, I finished my second square, and you can tell looking at this perfectly right from here to here. Oh, you know what? You guys probably were yelling at me. 16 is what I used for, I tell you, no wonder why I have extra stitches. 16 is what I used for when I made the blanket with the sock yarn. Yeah, those are the words, Robin, sock yarn blanket. That's why this is so much smaller than this one. According to all my math here, I used 20 stitches, which would make it better to fit than I had 18. Yeah. So what's going to happen is I'm going to go ahead and take this one off. You guys have seen the process. The process is the same. Even though I messed it up, you're still going to cast on whatever stitches you used here. So this half here, I used 20. I should have cast on 20. And then I would pick up 20 along there. So when I do this one on this side, I'm going to pull this out and I'll reknit it while you guys, you know, I'm watching Sherlock right now still. So you guys won't be here, of course. So I'll just pull it out. You saw the time lapse. And then for the next video, I'll show you how to cast on properly of 20 here and pick up 20. Because let's face it, my numbers don't really matter, because unless you're doing the exact same numbers as I am, and I'm sorry if I confused you, I'll put a little notation on that point when I'm picking up stitches. It doesn't really matter. I just thought maybe I was knitting tighter here and looser there. But I definitely do like the bigger square. I can see that for sure here. It's just one square. I caught it right away. I'll just pull this out and it comes out just as easy. I may have to add in a piece of yarn when I go to knit it up properly because I won't have enough yarn. But once I get it all undone there, all I have to do is pull on this. I will wind this into a ball as I go. And what I'll probably do is I'll save this piece. So when I cast on the next square, I'll make sure that I won't have to have 2 ends. And I'll save this as extra. So if I run out of this and I need to finish a square, then I'll go ahead and I'll have this as extra. It's okay to have a little left over. I just consider that my little oopsie. So now you'll know if you do it and this square is smaller than this one, think back. Maybe if you haven't started your blanket yet, write down numbers and put them inside your project bag instead of just tucking it away somewhere, but at least I did save the numbers, right? Ay, ay, ay. It's okay. See, we all make mistakes. I'm trying to teach you how to do this, and I made a mistake. This is really simple and easy to get things confused, but I was able to show you how to decrease. Let's see how many are on here. Yeah, it doesn't look like I'm going to have 20 anyways. I could pick up that extra one there, and I could probably pick up one there, but we'll see. But I'm going to show you what you can do in order to make sure you have enough for when you don't have enough. So that's going to balance it out. So I'm going to let my mind think that I made these mistakes on purpose so that you guys can learn from them. But let's face facts, I just screwed up. So what I want you guys to do for your homework now before your next video is to go ahead and do your square. Make sure you double check on the numbers that you're going to pick up the same that you had there. And then you can see at the end, this is where our point is. So I have my center spine going this way. So this will end up being this part of my blanket. So then on our next video, we're going to go this way and we're going to start picking up here and then casting on there. It's really super simple. And then our last square, as I mentioned, will be the center. So if you're looking for a code word this week, I think it's really obvious that it's going to have to be mistakes. Because you know what? We all make mistakes. But you know what, guys? This is yarn. It's not permanent. I made a mistake. That's it. It comes out that super simple. I don't have to worry about it. Same thing with crochet and knit. This is a whole lot easier than if I cut out a square from my 9 patch, and instead of cutting it out at 5 inches, I cut it out at 3.5. Because now that fabric, of course, will go in the scrap bin, but I would feel a little bit sadder about it. This one, I just pull it out. Now look, I'm just gonna start all over again. Keep watching my Sherlock. It's going to take a little bit longer today to get to that point on the video, but it's okay. I'm just going to go ahead and carry on. So I hope everything goes well for you guys. Take a step back, take a breath, think about it. Once you get going, I would definitely keep a little note. So if you have a little notepad, keep some type of a little notepad in your project bag. If you have, now this has my crochet hooks, but I don't have a Notion pouch in this project bag. If I had a Notion pouch, I would go ahead and take a piece of paper, a sticky note. I would go ahead and have a little notepad and put it in there, and I would write how many stitches I'm casting on. So I'm going to have 20 on one side, 20 on the other, for a total of 40. And then you can always make little extra notes in your notepad as you're going, and keep it with your project. That way, when you set it down, also, yeah, write down your needle size. Because if you're a knitter or a crocheter, you know that if it's a long-term project and you need a size 8 needle later on, you're going to come and steal it from this project, especially since it's going to be, if we finish a square, our needles come out and they're going to be loosey-goosey. They can get lost or they can be stolen and misappropriated for another project. Write down the start date you started your blanket, write down your needle size, the number of stitches you've cast on, and then that way, you won't have any of these problems 6 months from now and you try to figure out what size needle you were using and how many stitches. Okay guys, every day is a new day and it's a learning experience. I'll see you guys in the next video after I reknit my square. Bye.